بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حق الأشياء كما هي. ربنا زدنا علما وعملا ربنا زدنا علما وعملا يا رب العالمين وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في غزة وفي فلسطين كلها وفي كل عالم. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدو منك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة وفي فلسطين كلها وفي كل مكان. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربنا وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين يا أكرم الأكرمين. Okay, so we're still looking at Alam Iqbal's critique of cosmological arguments. Some of the things we have already looked at before, but we're just going through them again in order to see if we can add to what we had said before. So we are here in terms of the relay. Probably I should nor is the necessity of existence identical with conceptual necessity of causation, which is the utmost that this argument can prove. So even if the argument is successful, what it can prove is conceptual necessity. And this is sort of Kantian, post-Kantian argument, modern argument. So we'll look at this a bit, because I think that's a very valid point. And this applies to a lot of, probably most of arguments for the existence of God. So as far as necessity is concerned, there are different types of necessities. We understand by necessity, linguistically, I guess, what cannot be otherwise. I think that's a good starting. What cannot be otherwise? And we can distinguish between conceptual necessity and I would say logical necessity is a type of conceptual necessity. And what's the other term Alam Iqbal uses? Existence. So the other term he uses is necessity of existence, I think he says. Yeah. But what we can, in our term, we can use as existential necessity. And then existential necessity can be divided itself into whether they, again, conceptually can be divided into empirical necessity, metaphysical necessity. And a lot of people would say there's no such thing as empirical necessity, even if there is a metaphysical necessity. And other people say that necessity is a property of sentences or descriptions, um, nothing to do with being or existence. So, in that sense, there is neither empirical necessity nor metaphysical necessity. So, but just to say what is conceptual necessity. So, if necessity is something that cannot be otherwise, an example of conceptual necessity can be given something is A, it cannot be B, or it must be B. So, for example, to give a very obvious example, if I say that the capital of Russia, Moscow, then necessarily I can't deny that Moscow is not in Russia. So it means it is given that the capital of Russia is Moscow is necessarily in Russia. So you can't accept one and deny the other statement, because so this is sort of conceptual necessity. But on the other hand, at least on the face of it, we don't, or we shouldn't attribute, or we can see the distinction between the necessity in that sense and facts or beings. So, for example, the tree is green. Probably we can say that given the other condition, the tree must be green, given the meaning of green. That will come in conceptual necessity as well. But the fact that the world is, for example, and we are going at the level of world, because if we talk about the events in the world, we might be able to say something about necessity just because of the other events we believe exists, etc. But the fact that the world is, to say that it is necessary would seem attributing something conceptually to existence which does not belong it, because something is, just because it is, there is no necessity for it being there. So the fact that the world is, there's no necessity for it. It could have been. I mean, there's no contradiction in saying that it is possible there were no world, for example. So in that sense, we can't attribute necessity to existence. So how does this apply to cosmological argument? So conceptually, we have said that everything must have cause, for example. And the world exists. So the world must have a cause. And that cause must be a self-sufficient cause or self-caused, because otherwise we would have infinite regress, which seems contrary to our rational expectations. So the arguments is sort of based on our rational expectation, on our rationality, what we think is reasonable or should be. But the thing is, so this is all conceptual, and we can say there's sort of conceptual necessity in this argument, depending on how the argument is, how strong the argument. But how conceptually necessary this argument might be, and how strong this argument might be, can you still see that there's no guarantee that the chain of being will follow our expectation. Because how we think about the world might not be the same as how the world actually is. So that's the basic gulf, which in a sense can be which in a sense can be that gulf can be bridged at the empirical level, because we can look at the facts and see if our rational expectations, they fulfill our rational expectation or frustrate them. But we can't ever verify our rational expectation at the level of metaphysics or the arguments which are necessarily beyond our experiential reach. So there, our rational expectation and the bridge between our rational expectation and the existence of being can never be actually verified. So that's what he mean by that. It's obvious reason that the relation of cause with the two terms, nor is the necessity of the identical with the conceptual necessity of causation, which is the utmost of the argument can prove. Okay. So in that sense, even the best of cosmological arguments, best of them, logically foolproof, logically error-proof, are still faced with this basic thing that our rational chain of thought is different from the existence, the way things are, the way world is. And there's no necessity that our conceptual necessity will end up being the same as how the world behaves, at least at the level at which we are talking about here, which cannot be verified empirically. So I think this is the argument, and this is a very powerful argument. And I think probably we will say something more. I just tried to sort of summarize the thought in my own understanding in a layman sort of non-technical term. But next round we'll look at these distinction, the distinction between conceptual necessity and whether necessity can be applied to or is different from the necessity of existence or existential necessity. We'll look at it for a bit more in a bit more depth and more probably in a more technical terms. So just to go through it, nor is the necessity of the existence identical with conceptual necessity of causation, which is the utmost that this argument can prove. That is cosmological argument. Okay, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم